But even right now, there's cases like Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni that have generated a lot of interest. So I'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Yeah, you have obviously the Diddy case that's going to trial, and then you have true crime, and that's
Right.
really what started. And those are cases like Brian Koberger, right? Idaho,
Okay.
University murders. I'll spend time, and I'll actually, when the trials happen, I'll do the live trial commentary daily on cases like that.
Stephen Geday here, sitting with Neama Rahmani. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
That's absolutely perfect. Thanks, Stephen.
Beautiful.
Excited to be on, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Outstanding. I'm going to have a very happily given intro here because there's just so much I'm going to try to cram it into an intro and not a not a very long prelude. But Mr. Rahmani is the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, a firm that has over $1 billion in aggregated verdicts for your clients. You've represented Disney, Marriott, the Roman Catholic Church, frequent commentator on common, big name news outlets such as Fox News, CNN, BBC. And a pretty unique claim to fame. You are literally one of the youngest lawyers to have ever graduated from the ranks of Harvard Law in its entire history, which is just astounding. And also author of your own book, From Harvard to Hashtag, My Journey from Big Law to Business. So quite a very checkered resume, which has been dramatically condensed for purposes of this intro. Um, so, Mr. Rahmani, again, thank you so much for being here. I really look forward to our conversation.
Stephen, really excited to be on. Basically, I'm just a big time nerd, but guest.
Outstanding. Well, I think as titled in your book, from big law to business, we kind of span the breadth from the legal industry to business and kind of fusing those two columns here. So I think it's very appropriate and very fitting to have you on. Really excited to talk about not just your own career, but your firm as it's grown and scaled. And then just kind of, I want to really talk about the industry itself. And there's a lot of changes going on, and I'm really, interested in picking your brain on kind of what you make of some of them and how you might be adapting. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of useful advice for all the lawyers out there.
Oh, glad to be a part of it. And like you said, I've done it all. Big law, many years, government, both state and federal, small law, starting, scaling, running my own firm. So, the past 20 plus years, I've seen it all, I've done it all. And like you said, the legal landscape, just the entire business has dramatically changed since I started. And I'm sure you've seen it as well. So, happy to dive right into it.
Absolutely. Let's get to it. So when you said since you've started, just give us a quick primer on, you started very young. When did you get into, when were you kind of, when were you a rookie? When were you, very green and tell us what was the era then and kind of just take us quickly through, from that graduation point till what you got into early days and then kind of how your career took its turns to get you to where you are now.
Sure, I'll try to give the quick summary. So, I was a young high school grad, 16, when I started college. I took the LSAT at 18, was at Harvard Law School when I was 19 years old. I graduated when I was 22, and when I was a, young law student, I was just kind of focused on money and the prestige, right? And I'm from LA. I was going to come back to LA, and I was just deciding between the big law firms that were based
Hmm.
in LA. So I went to Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher.
Well, I'd imagine you're kind of the Doogie Howser of legal at the time. I mean, you were pretty much able to write your ticket from wherever you wanted to go there.
Yeah, I was definitely a lot younger than my classmates. Most of them were really a decade older than me. And, and by the way, I don't recommend this at all. If anyone's watching and you're, a college student, or you're even a law student, everyone always asks me, like, would you do it again? I'd say probably not. There's no real
Interesting.
advantage to working the rest of your life. In terms of social emotional development, I don't think I was there. Maybe academically I was, but I would be much better suited to take my time, maybe take a year or two to work for a law firm. And look, I'm really happy with where I ended up, but
Hmm.
it wasn't a fun road at the age that I was,
It sounds grueling. I mean, I can just imagine how intense it was. And just like you said, you're probably in class on the day to day, not just with people who've gone through the sort of normal track in terms of age progression, but people who've had some mini careers that they've already got their feet wet for, whether it's, in finance, pseudo legal. They're coming in with some real world life experience, and you blaze through all your, obviously not just college and law school, but I'm assuming there was a fast track that preceded that in elementary, middle, and high school, even at some point.
Exactly. So, I was skipping grades and just kind of pushing myself. And like you said, there are people with advanced degrees, years of work experience, which is just going to make you a better law student and a better lawyer. But,
Mm,
obviously ended up okay. Came out of
sure.
law school, was really young, ended up at big firms. And, this was sort of the heyday, the tech boom, right? I remember, when I was there, they bumped our salaries at the time. It was a huge bump. It was went from 95,000 to 125,000. So at a young age, as a young lawyer, we were making a lot of money. And
Right. Can you
well,
give us an approximate year just to kind of put
yeah,
us in the time
yeah,
frame?
I was a summer associate back in 2000,
Okay.
2001, and 2002 law school grad. So I came out. What I wanted to do was to make a lot of money, but really what I
Hmm.
wanted to do is become a prosecutor and a judge. That was ultimately my career goal. And when I was choosing between the different firms, I ended up going to a law firm, Melvin and Myers, because at the time, the U.S. attorney under the Clinton administration had left. Bush was elected. He had come over as a partner. So I'm going to work for this guy, and actually being someone who made some made some history recently because he was named Alejandro Mayorkas. He was Biden's head of DHS. He was impeached
Hmm.
by House Republicans. Ultimately, he was acquitted in the Senate, but he was someone that I was working for because I wanted to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and be a federal prosecutor and be a federal judge. That was always the goal.
Okay.
So I go, I'm working for the firm, and then some things happen at the DOJ. First, the attorney general at the time, his name was Alberto Gonzalez. He fired some U.S. attorneys for political reasons. It was a huge scandal at the time. And there were congressional hearings, and the DOJ then had a hiring freeze because the economy took a hit with a housing crisis, mortgage crisis. So I ended up getting stuck at Big Law for longer than I wanted, but ultimately I was able to make my way to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and
Okay.
I loved it.
So
Great.
you're in AUSA there, I take it.
Yeah, I was in AUSA. I was at
Okay.
AUSA, loved it, was primarily doing drug, human trafficking cases. I was hired under a Bush U.S. attorney, and then I stayed on for an Obama U.S. attorney, and it was sort of interesting at the time to see how things changed. Uh,
Sure. Changing of the guards there, politics, procedures, and
Yeah. Now, like the line between law and politics is completely blurred. But the reason I bring all this up, like at the time, it was a big deal. They're saying, "Oh my God, you're making legal decisions for political reasons." But I managed to survive. I don't know how my colleagues that are still there are dealing with it. I know this isn't a political show, but I loved it. I loved it. Amazing job. And my wife, who was also a lawyer, and I had our daughter. She was born, and she said,
okay.
prosecuting drug cartels, probably not the safest, the best job for someone with a kid.
True.
So I ended up going to the city of LA where I was doing public corruption, government ethics. My son was born back to back, and I was being vetted for a state court judgeship in
Mm.
California, in LA, where I'm at. And
Okay.
my wife was an attorney for foster kids. I was working for the government as a prosecutor, and we were broke, and we couldn't afford to live in LA under two government salaries. Doesn't matter whether I was a prosecutor or a judge. So,
Sure. Just the realities, especially, new family on the way and, got mouths to feed now and yep.
yeah, especially a city like LA, it was
Oh
tough.
yeah.
I remember my bonuses at the firm were pretty much my salary at the government. So, just huge difference in terms of the amount of money you make. So we sat down one day and we had these two young kids, and my wife and I had a conversation, and she said that one of us needs to get a real job. And that
Hmm.
one of us was me. So I almost went back to the big firm. They said, listen, come as a junior partner. Let's see if you can generate some business. And it just happened at the time. One of my former colleagues, the second person who actually recruited me out of law school, one was the former U.S. attorney. One was a young associate. His name's Alan. He's my current partner now. He had left in 2004 and he started his own firm. And in the
Okay.
beginning, he did everything. He did business lit, all types of litigation, right? But ultimately, he started doing more and more plaintiffs' work, and he kind of developed this pretty successful plaintiffs' practice. He teamed up with a buddy of his who was a public defender from law school. But by 2013, they had a falling out. They went their separate ways. So Alan, my current partner, approached me and said, "Listen, don't go back to big law. You're gonna hate it. Let's start a plaintiffs firm." I said,
Hmm.
"Plaintiffs firm? Like, what do you mean?" He's like, "Personal injury, employment, civil rights." I'm like, "PI? I mean, are you crazy, man? I went to Harvard Law School. I'm not gonna be that guy on some billboard or bus bench. That's just not me." But I'm glad he didn't give up, and he spent 6 or 7 months trying to recruit me. And he sold me on this vision of this higher end plaintiffs firm. So in 2014, we started West Coast Trial Lawyers. It was
Hmm.
just me and him, and since that time, we've grown pretty quickly. We're one of the bigger firms here in California. We have 25 lawyers and about 200 staff
In about a decade.
in about a decade.
That's fast. I think there's a lot of lawyers who are, they count the years in terms of decades almost, 1 decade, 2 decade, the decades are the units rather than years, so to speak. And, the measuring stick of 20, 30 years isn't obscene. You did it in basically 1 decade. That's a massive, massive uplift.
It wasn't easy. When I got into this, I said, okay. And by the way, the reason I agreed to do this and the way my partner sold me on this was he said, don't go do defense work. You're gonna hate it. You're gonna be defending criminals, white collar criminals. You're gonna be defending corporations. And he's right. I didn't like doing defense work. I like being on offense.
Hmm.
And he sold me. He said, "Listen, this is like going after the bad guy or the bad girl and actually getting paid. You're not putting people in prison, but you're representing victims. If you like the case, you keep the case, you retain the client. And if you don't like it, you don't have to represent them. You don't have to represent anyone you don't want. And if you want to try the case, just like you're a prosecutor, you can try the case. So
Hmm.
having control over your litigation, being on offense was something that was really appealing to me. So once I was sold, really kind of the question was, and the question anyone needs to ask, doesn't matter what type of law firm you are, big, small, is how am I going to generate business? And
Sure.
I happen to know a lot of the big billboard and TV players in town, just by luck and kind of the community that we were in. And I had an honest conversation with myself. I said, listen, I cannot compete with someone that's been running TV ads for 20, 30 years, right? Or is, spending 7 figures a month just on billboards.
Hmm.
So we decided to go entirely in the direction of digital and social.
Okay.
And that's how we were able to grow our firm, right? We were, one of the first firms on TikTok, for instance, but like everything could be Facebook, LinkedIn, obviously Google, Yelp, whatever it is. We would run ads, we would create content.
Okay.
And then I developed this niche about, 6, 7 years ago where I started to do TV, and they would bring me on, and it started small and ended up being big, but they would bring me on as the prosecution perspective when they were talking
Okay.
about
As a
cases.
commentator for, cutting edge, current events in the news,
Exactly.
basically.
So it really started with some of the niche channels like Court TV and Law and Crime, people that were following true crime cases. But they would bring me on because there's plenty of criminal defense lawyers that are going to come opine and talk about cases. But prosecutors, they're working for the government. They can't, be talking about different murder trials.
Hmm.
So they would bring me as a former prosecutor. And because I wasn't doing any criminal defense work and I didn't care about being conflicted off or, saying folks were guilty, they brought me in and I kind of developed this role as a legal analyst, which
Hmm.
helped both on the PR side, but also social media, right? Because everyone's just obsessed with true crime nowadays, or
Sure.
politics, or entertainment.
Outstanding. So, will you attribute? I mean, essentially, that was really what I'm wondering here is how did that decade sprint, I'll call it, to go from zero to $1 billion in verdicts is, what is the key to that success? It's obviously getting the right types of cases. And you mentioned something my ears picked up on. You mentioned kind of a higher end PI firm, not just chasing. So I'm assuming that you guys leaned in pretty heavily to a certain type of target segment, a certain type of niche, as opposed to just any type of soft tissue injury that comes in the door. How are you able, I guess, a few questions I have. One is, what would you really attribute your success to? Is it really leaning in hard to the social media, digital outlets of gathering leads and clients? Or were there some other factors that you would attribute that success formula to?
That's absolutely right. So when I started to sort of analyze the market, right, whether it's personal injury or employment, I realized, well, there's really sort of types of consumers in the space. And I would like to call them three levels of sophistication. And not to
Hmm.
say that um, people that are calling a billboard or a bus bench or the yellow pages, they're not sophisticated, but they're doing a lot less research, right? If someone is
Sure.
calling based on a TV commercial, sometimes, the lawyer on the commercial is dead. The firm,
Hmm.
yeah, some other firm has, bought the name or the rights, and, they're using that name because, well, it's been a successful brand for so many years. At least here in California, sometimes they'll run generic campaigns, that really don't even identify the lawyer. So I realized is, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to market to them because that market is really saturated.
Okay.
But then if you kind of work your way up, there's people that are going to be a little bit more sophisticated, right? They're going to be the folks who are going to go online, they're going to read reviews, and, you know, I can differentiate myself both in terms of my education and experience, but
Hmm.
also the quality of the service that we're providing, right? So
Okay.
these are individuals that, maybe they don't know a ton of lawyers, but they certainly know how to research one. And they can say, okay, well, here's someone who's smart, right? Based on where he went to law school. He's got this experience, representing these big companies. He's tried lots and lots of cases. Maybe I should hire him as opposed to someone that, maybe I see all over a billboard, but maybe has never been inside a courtroom.
Right.
So
So when you're saying sophisticated, you're not just talking about somebody who's driving a Rolls Royce wearing a mink coat. You're talking about the level of sophistication and their intellect, kind of their research process to vet and find the lawyer that they feel comfortable with. And it's not just, well, there's the guy's face at the time that I happened to drive by and thought of in my case, and there his smiling faces on a billboard with a phone number. You're a little more happenstance oriented there. You're talking about really leaning into the fact that your unique pedigree, your accolades, kind of what makes you you from a quality perspective comes forth.
exactly. And I think that the folks that are willing to sort of put in the time and go online and take a look at the bio, again, not to say like I'm an amazing person, or there's a lot of good lawyers that went nowhere near Harvard Law School, right? But I brought something unique to the market.
Sure.
The former federal prosecutor, the young age of Harvard, where if people are going to sort of dig around a little bit and compare my resume to maybe someone else's,
Hmm.
you know, maybe I would be more appealing. But again,
Right.
you can't do that, on a billboard, right? Or
Right.
a 30-second commercial, right? You're going to need someone that's going to want to do a deeper dive. So that's sort of another level of sophistication. And then I realized that even when it came to lawyers, right? A lot of big law lawyers, and I was one of them, they don't hold personal injury lawyers in high regard. They think that it's poor quality lawyering,
Mm.
and people that are smart, they don't take those types of jobs, right? These are the people
Interesting.
that graduate bottom of their class. So then I said, okay, well, look, if I can, you know, market myself to those types of people. Maybe it was my former colleagues at the DOJ. A lot of them, became clients, or people that I worked with, or people that knew the people that I work with at Big Law. A lot of the cases came in from referrals because, yeah, maybe you don't like PI lawyers, but at least Neama Rahmani used to work with me
Right.
and did good work. So, we ended up marketing ourselves a little bit differently than some of the other big players in town and throughout the state. So I was able to get a different type of market that, the folks that were running TV ads were
Very
not.
interesting. So you're almost utilizing what I'll call a crowded landscape and even sort of this quote unquote, you know, ambulance chasing sort of motif to your advantage to say, you know what, I'm not that. I'm gonna establish myself as the bulwark of, quality in a sea of quantity. And then that way, not only is that differentiating you in a crowded market, but also you're using that to lean into a particular type of target segment of a client that you're saying, you know what, I want to represent that type of individual. It's a better case. It's probably going to be a better relationship, a little more respect and trust going your way instead of just, somebody who's, digging up a name that they got, found on a book of matches somewhere. So there's sort of this alignment that I'm hearing as you're describing it between your marketing methods as well as your client selection.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right, Stephen. And like I said, not to say we're a better firm, there's a lot of great firms out there, but I think the way we market is important. So if a lead comes in and it's a questionable case, we're going to decline the case, whereas other firms might take it. And the reason we
Hmm.
decline the case is, obviously we care about our reputation, but importantly, if it's a questionable case, I'm not going to be able to make the client happy with the result, right? And you can't
True.
leave a bad review for a billboard or a TV commercial, but you certainly can for someone that you found on Google. So
Hmm.
we ended up, and again, we're a large firm, we have large volume, but we weren't just taking every single kind of case where, maybe the case was worth thousands of dollars, but the client would be unhappy with the result. And
Right.
so we ended up declining those cases, passing on them. Not to say we only want, cases that are worth a lot of money, but I want cases where at the end of the day, the client can say, look, I'm happy with the service that Nima and West Coast provided.
Hmm.
If I can't provide a good service, I'm going to get bad reviews, and then our whole marketing system falls apart.
Right. Right. So you're looking at a case not just as money in the door, but an opportunity for impact on that client, and then that collateral reputation that's going to flow from there, namely digitally speaking, that it's going to be visible to all.
Exactly.
Which, let's face it, when we're talking about word of mouth in the old days, pre-social media, reputation's everything. But when reputation isn't just mouth to mouth, ear to ear, but it's actually, through a megaphone to the whole public, it's even more important.
Oh, absolutely. Your clients are going to be your best source of referrals. They're going to be the ones who are leaving you reviews. So if you can't do right by them, then your whole system falls apart. Again, if you're operating in the digital and social
Hmm.
ecosystem, if you're not, you can probably get away with having a different type of brand if you're doing a lot of radio, because again, you're not relying on that, social validation and feedback like we are.
That's amazing to hear. That unity between understanding how you're reaching out to your clients. What's that relationship like? What are their expectations? You're looking for that impact, which is going to circle back to the positive accolades, and it's a whole spiral that sort of feeds itself. Whereas, right, if the if a particular lawyer is just interested in getting everything that comes in the door, which, let's face it, a chase for leads is a real thing, and it's hard to turn down available business. That's a very different game that one might be playing than what you're describing.
Exactly. And, a lot of lawyers I talk to will say, listen, the leads come in, I've already spent the money on the marketing. It's a sunk cost. I'm going to take
Hmm.
the case, even
Sure.
though, um, I may end up dropping it down the road. It may end up being something that ends up in, small claims or limited court, something that, is probably not going to be a really good result for the client. So for me, if I look at the
Right.
case and say, look, there's a good chance I'm going to drop this case a few months from now, maybe I should, pass this case on to another firm. Not because I'm not willing to take the hard case, but this is the type of case that may result in an unhappy client at the conclusion of the case.
Right. Now, shining in the social media digital landscape might have been a little more uniquely available a decade ago. Nowadays, I think it's the secret's sort of out in terms of, hey, this might be better than, the back of a phone book or a billboard. How do you find, what are your sort of, insights into popping in this landscape of, the digital, system, and kind of having your personality, your uniqueness, your strengths shine when obviously there's a sea of other guys trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, some of it is if you got a good personality. I'm not saying I'm that guy, but there's lawyers that just pop, like you said. We have some
Hmm.
of them here, which are amazing. That's not me. I'm a little bit more kind of even killed. But I think what I bring is not necessarily the personality, but I talk about cases that people are interested in. And there's
Hmm.
really three types of cases. And most of them have nothing to do with personal injury. It can be a catastrophic injury, someone's paralyzed, someone, no one wants to hear about that, right? So
Hmm.
what I do is I talk about true crime. I talk
Okay.
about entertainment cases. I'm here in LA, and I talk about political cases. So,
Mm.
right now, the big things I'm talking about, obviously anything Trump related, right? I'm gonna lean
Sure.
right in. I have no problem doing that, and I'll call it like it is. I do CNN, I do Fox. I sometimes do CNN
Hmm.
and Fox on the same day. And if I think Trump's done something wrong, I'll say it. If I think Biden has done something wrong, I'll say it. And it can be Joe Biden, it can be Hunter Biden. It doesn't matter.
Right.
I bring that prosecution perspective. And then, I'm talking about different celebrity cases, right? It could be, you kind of once in a while you have a unicorn, right? Like Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. That's a case that
Hmm.
everyone's watching. But even right now, there's cases like Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni that have generated a lot of interest. So I'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Yeah, you have obviously the Diddy case that's going to trial. And then you have true crime. And that's
Right.
really what started. And those are cases like Brian Koberger, right? Idaho,
Okay.
University murders. I'll spend time and, I'll actually, when the trials happen, I'll do the live trial commentary daily on cases like that.
So you'll look at these topics, these trending cases and headlines, even if they have nothing to do with what your day to day practice area or bread and butter consists of. You're looking at it as this is a magnet for people's attention. I'm going to speak about these topics in an educated manner. They want to hear it. They might as well hear about it from me. And now I'm basically renting real estate in their head, in their own headspace. And now you're recognized. They know your name. They see you as authoritative. And then, by the way, if I have a case that's up your alley, you're top of mind.
Exactly. Law is not that interesting. Most areas of the law. Now, some are, but I don't think slip and falls and dog bites and, car accidents or things people really care about, to learn about, unless it's directly affecting them. But these other areas of the law, you better believe that people want to know who else was involved in these freak offs with Diddy, or what's
Hmm.
going to happen next, with Trump and immigration, right? Or, you know, eh, serial killers and true crime have been fascinating people for decades now, right? And
Sure.
it could be a case that's decades old. One of the biggest questions I get right now is what's happening with the Menendez brothers? Are they going to get out,
Hmm.
right? And that's a case that dates back to the 80s. So what I try to do is to make law interesting and understandable and really bite-sized segments. People's attention span nowadays, I mean, it's a TikTok era. If you don't get their attention in a couple seconds, if you can't summarize a case in 30 seconds to a minute, they're going to swipe to the next person. And
Hmm.
this is, I mean, we're going long form here, but I'm sure it's going to be chopped up for social media, like you
Sure.
said. And people want bite-sized sound bites, right? And
Right.
I don't care if it's, CNN, BBC, Fox News, or, your TikTok lawyer summarizing a
Right.
case. I spend a lot of my time taking the information, giving my own analysis in a really sort of short bite that people can kind of take with them when they're kind of carrying on their legal conversation.
Which, as a trial attorney, doesn't sound that disparate from the skill that's needed to summarize a case succinctly and effectively for a jury anyway, right? Like that skill of taking something that's, a big mishmash of, spaghetti all over the place and distilling it into something digestible and that the common man can understand it quickly and relate to it and understand it. That sharp edginess that you're talking about grabbing people's attention on TikTok, for example, is probably resonant of compelling opening and statements and closing arguments. Where if there's a saying I was heard in training with if you can't explain it to a third grader and for them to understand you're talking in too lofty terminology anyway. So it's probably not that differentiated from effective trial strategy work where you're trying to really take, you've been strategizing a case for months and it might be have all these moving parts, but you got to find that thing that just puts a spear through that person's head to just get it.
That's absolutely right. And I think one of the mistakes lawyers make is they talk too much and less is more, both inside the courtroom and out. You have to respect jurors' time when you're trying cases. Most of them, they don't want to be there and they don't want to hear you ramble on and on. So if you can't distill the information into its most readily digestible form. If you're going to go on and on, then you're going to lose your jury, you're going to lose your case, and if you're on social media, you're going to lose your audience.
Now, let me ask you something that you mentioned in the on ramp for your introduction segment here was that you almost in a way don't recommend your educative path of going essentially, a decade earlier than your peers. And one of the cons there that you pointed out was the sort of social and emotional immaturity compared to academic and intellectual. Well, what we're describing is a very much of a high EQ, component here of relating to people, understanding how they tick, bonding with them, connecting with them quickly, seamlessly. Where and how would you self sort of analyze yourself that you acquired that ability, especially given your on ramp and kind of being at, let's just say, an age disadvantage to relating to sort of your peer group by and large? You obviously got
Yes,
that somewhere.
yeah, this is something I learned when I started my firm, and the reason is it wasn't a skill set I needed before, right? When
Hmm.
you're at Big Law, you have those institutional clients, right? This has been a client of the firm for, 100 years or however many years, right? And then you have, the government, right? Your client is the government or the people of the state of
Right.
California, or whoever you're representing. You don't have clients, but when you have to generate business and your clients, they're not GCs of Fortune 500 companies, they're ordinary people. Oftentimes, when I talk to someone, it's the first time they've ever even talked to a lawyer, right? There's a distrust of lawyers. People don't like them,
Hmm.
right? And that's just the reality. So if you can't, put them at ease, give them some information, right? Because the, the consideration period, especially for the type of work that I do, no one's like planning to be seriously injured or having a loved one die or
Sure.
be wrongfully terminated at work or be discriminated against sexually harassed. Something bad's happened, and oftentimes they're making a decision that they never thought they would have to make in a short period of time, and they're upset and they're afraid. Unfortunately, as lawyers, oftentimes we're in the business of misery. So if you
Hmm.
connect with people, it's like you can be the greatest doctor in the world, but you might have terrible bedside manner. That's
Right.
sort of the
That
analogy.
emotional connection.
You got to make sure that you, as a lawyer, let's not forget we're in the service industry, right? I'm not
Right.
someone if I can't connect with my client, if I can't make them feel better and help them in their time of need, then I'm probably in the wrong business.
Outstanding. No, so while we're talking about sort of connecting and bonding with people, one thing I'm curious about is you also mentioned how your firm is about 25 lawyers and around 200 support staff, if I heard that right. So in and of itself, building that team and then the culture that surrounds it, that's a challenge in and of itself. Getting clients, getting the business, that's the demand side. The supply side of who's running the fort, who are you working with? That's equally challenging, I think, for lawyers on the sourcing of quality, associates, staff, the right partners to begin with. Can you just take us through how you grew that in a way that delivers this high quality level of service in the process as well?
The two best things about having my own firm are I get to choose my clients and I get to choose my colleagues. And, we were all law students at some point and we've all worked for firms, and lawyers can be terrible people. And, when I walk into my firm, when I see people, I say, hey, this is someone I want to see every day. This is someone I want to have a beer with afterwards. So, I choose people that I like to be around and I would like to be in the trenches with. I would like to try
Hmm.
cases with. And so that's the luxury that I have as one of the partners of the firm, as one of the owners of the firm. So I get to do that. And a lot of the folks who are here, they've been here for years since the beginning because I don't treat them, both personally and professionally, as some billing unit because the
Hmm.
difference between what we do and what billable firms do, if you're at a billable firm and one of your colleagues leaves, there's someone else that can step in and replace them and bill for the client and make money.
Hmm.
For us, when someone leaves, it's pretty disruptive for the client because that may be that client's, source of communication, that their primary
Sure.
contact at the firm, the person that's been handling their case for months or years.
A lot
So,
more personal. Yeah.
it is really personal. It's not just business. So we really try to encourage that environment where people are here, they're committed for the long term. They have they believe in their clients and their cases, and they have equity in their cases, and that's how we've been able to build the team that we've had here.
Outstanding. Now, with a decade look back of history, approximately half of that preceded COVID and approximately the other half was during and since. Did you notice, or how did you guys handle that in terms of just the geographic concentricity of, focusing on, having your team on site versus remote, locally sourced from, LA in your case, for home office purposes versus a more widespread net, pooling. How have you handled that? And was there a shift pre and post?
There was. So we shut down for a year and a half. Now, we were still working, but courts were closed. California,
Hmm.
it was on lockdown here. So it was very difficult to move our cases. I was still doing TV. I was doing it from home. My colleagues here, they were amazing. They'd come to my house and we would record and, they would edit and, we would do everything we could do to kind of keep things moving from a
Right.
TV social media perspective, but no question, we took a significant step back. When we reopened, we were able to focus some of our efforts and expand. We opened a pretty large office in Las Vegas after the pandemic. We opened an overseas office in Colombia. We're setting up our office in Phoenix. We're going to go into Seattle. So we were able to expand geographically after the pandemic once things were reopened again in a way that we really
Hmm.
couldn't during the shutdown.
I see. Now, as you're expanding into these other geographic areas, do you have a formula or a template for looking for, for staff, for whether it's associates or support staff, locally in that area, or more of a geographically nimble or even remote type of model?
We've been in person, and I know there's pros and cons of each. I'm sure you've had tons of people on the show that, really like a work from home system. For some reason, it hasn't worked that well for us. We just
Okay.
lost a lot of efficiency when we were remote. In terms of what we do with the social media, with the TV, we really need that in-person collaboration. So
Hmm.
well, we've had physical space, brick and mortar. We've had folks in the office. Even our overseas office, everyone is in the office in Colombia. That's just sort of how we've done things, and it's worked for us. I know some people love work from home. A lot of my colleagues, a lot of people in California, people are all over, and it helps them when it comes to recruiting. We've just maintained our in-office space, and it's happened to work for us.
Now, when you mentioned Colombia, that's terribly unique. Not many. But there's definitely firms that are expanding. State to state. City to city, county to county. Overseas to Colombia, is that still personal injury? What type of work is that, and what's the sort of rationale? What are you chasing that in there?
Yeah, so what we have there, we have our call center because we want, people to be answering the phones on nights and weekends. They don't have to be in the office. We want the folks who are here to have their nights and weekends off, spend time
Hmm.
with their friends and family. So most people go to the Philippines or, Southeast Asia. It just happened that our CMO lived in Colombia for many
I see.
years. And he said, let's set it up over there. Obviously, they're Spanish speakers. It's closer in terms of the time zone, and
Hmm.
it was really his baby and his idea. So our offsite team ended up being set up out there.
Interesting.
I have to confess that I've never been to our Columbia office, but a lot of our lawyers regularly go there in terms of training and so forth. But
Wow. So it's not
yeah,
so much that you're practicing law and offering legal services in Colombia. It's more or less a cost-effective arm of the intake process that's stationed there.
exactly. So we have,
That's smart.
overflow receptionists, we have night and weekends. I mean, we get so many calls that the last thing we want is just sort of take a message, goes into a black hole. We really want to provide 24/7 service. So if it's something that the night and weekend group can handle, obviously,
Hmm.
courts are closed, law firms are closed, insurance companies are closed, but we want to make sure that we're available in case of an emergency, in case there is someone that needs help immediately. I mean, let's say it's a car
Right.
accident, right? They need their car towed, or there's some issue. We really want to make sure that we have that team available
Hmm.
24/7 to our clients, and that's where our overseas team comes in.
And I think that you obviously your firm has the size, the critical mass to support your own, essentially your own internalized call center. That's a very critical step, in terms of the intake process, because it's one thing to, put out the net. It's another to collect leads. It's another to convert those leads into a signed case. And, I think obviously that gold standard of 24/7 attentiveness can be delivered in a variety of ways. One of them is through AI chatbots. Obviously one is to outsource call centers. I think a lot of lawyers, who might hear this might say, well, that's great, but, I don't have enough cases. I don't have enough, enough structure to warrant that to essentially, scale up that way. Did you sort of go through a phased process to get to that stage? And how did sort of that work along the way?
Yeah, we did. We used different third-party companies to take those calls because, yeah, when we're smaller, it didn't make sense to have,
Hmm.
dedicated staff working on nights and weekends. But we didn't want to miss those calls because if you do miss those calls, they're not going to wait for you, potential clients.
Sure.
They're going to go to the next firm, right? When
Right.
they pick up the phone, they expect to talk to someone right away. So
Right.
we outsourced it for a while, and there's some effective companies both inside and outside the U.S. Same thing, we use different chat companies, both AI and actually individuals who would chat and who would text. But over time, we realized just in terms of the sort of cohesiveness, it's really better to keep it in-house, to have
Hmm.
in-house intake people that are available as opposed to you chatting some third-party company, they send the script to your intake team. There's a little bit of a handoff.
Sure.
So we've brought it all in-house, but I completely understand how for some folks that may not make
Right.
sense.
And I think, really, as you're describing it, the formula sort of had to change. There was no sort of quote unquote right formula. It kind of depended on your stage and depending on what level. There's that trade-off of control and cost. And I think, as you sort of went through those stages very quickly, by the way, especially when you factor in cutting out some time for the COVID shutdown, that decade gets chopped down even to a smaller, span of time, even more impressively. It sounds like migrated and sort of adapted very quickly to the scaling that went on, changing those critical systems to keep up with what was ahead rather than languishing and kind of just, dragging your heels based on where you guys were yesterday.
No question. One thing that, and I talked a little bit about this in my book, or a lot. One thing that I've had to learn is the business of law. I might have known the practice of law, tried many cases, convicted many people, put people away for many years. When I was a federal, probably put more than 1,000 people in federal prison, but I knew nothing about running a business, even nothing. So this was
Wow.
something I had to learn on the fly. Obviously, my partner had some experience, but a lot of what I've had to do and learn is learn the marketing side of things as well as the business side of things to, supplement the practice of law, which I, fancy myself a good lawyer, but very inexperienced, not knowledgeable at all with respect to the other two. So that's been my learning curve, my personal growth and development.
What were some of the most impactful lessons you learned along the way? As you said, learning on the fly. See, I'm sure there were some moments, I'm sure there were some, moments where you're banging your head against the wall and figuring it out real time. And there's no better teacher like than lessons and failures that you learn and adapt and, pivot from, to save some other people some of the same, mistakes along the way. So that it might be expensive in terms of time or even cost. What would you say, sort of, I guess, if you maybe top three, if they come to mind, of lessons that you would say, geez, if I could go back in time, I would have done this differently?
Yeah, I think one of them is choosing the right cases. I like to give the poker analogy, and the worst hand in poker is the second best hand, right? If you have a good
Mm.
case, you can and you should push it really aggressively, like a good hand, right? You should be aggressive, you should be betting, you should be raising. If you have a bad hand, it's easy, right? You fold your hand, right? You're gonna maybe lose your blind or your ante.
Hmm.
If you take questionable cases, you got to make sure that you win. So if you start taking cases, and I'm not saying you should be too tight of a player or too scared of a player or too conservative, right? Even in poker, right? If they think that you're
Hmm.
weak or you're scared, they're gonna run all over you. But make sure that you identify those strong cases, push them as aggressively as you can when you have the facts and law on your side. You have the cases that aren't viable or good cases, recognize them, fold those cases, don't pursue them, and be wary of the questionable cases because they can take a lot of time and a lot of money. The other lesson is you got to have some sort of differentiator, right? Unless you have significant financial backing and you can come in and just buy a piece of the market share in your geo. If you're
Hmm.
going into a competitive, saturated space like personal injury, you got to have a plan, a really robust marketing plan, because a lot of it is, you can be the greatest lawyer in the world, but if no one knows who you are, then you're not going to get clients, you're not going to get cases. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people kind of want to hang their shingle, but don't really spend the time on the marketing side of things. And
Hmm.
the last thing we kind of touched upon, but you're building a culture, you're building a firm. It's important to surround yourself with people that, if you want to scale big, especially that you trust and can manage different departments and lots of people. You're not going to be able to grow this big and do everything yourself. So, for instance, I know yeah, you were communicating with different team members, but I have a lot of help in terms of setting up TV interviews, talking to producers, reporters. I mean, our social media team's fantastic. My assistant Julia,
Hmm.
we have in-house videographer Noah here. He's fantastic. We have in-house editor. There's no way we could do the things that we do if it were just me, because
Hmm.
you got people that are experts in what they do. You got to bring on the right people and you got to step back and let them do their job.
Very smart. Very smart advice. Thank you. Um, as we're talking about adaption, adaptive principles, there's a lot going on now. You talked about leaning into social media before that was necessarily ubiquitous. Trends nowadays. You mentioned about an office in Phoenix. Arizona is obviously a front runner state for the non-lawyer owned edifices to take hold of the market. You mentioned, capitalists even coming in and investing in a market and kind of becoming a little more ubiquitous in the airwaves. What are your thoughts in terms of where the industry is heading in that respect, and sort of how that impacts the marketplace, and again, where lawyers fit into that pecking order along the line?
Yeah, law has been sort of unique in that it's been able to withhold the tide of, VC and private equity, right? You see medicine where it's just really sort of all corporate right now, right? You do
Hmm.
have, solo doctors, but even a lot of them are sort of opting out of health insurance. But, I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in our lifetime there's, Amazon Law, and you see this consolidation with these firms. They're gobbling one another up, and it's becoming tougher and tougher to be a solo or a small shop. And even from a marketing perspective, if you are a client and you're going to hire a personal injury firm, and most of them charge the same percentage, right?
Mhm.
33% or whatever the case may be. You're probably going to hire who you think is the biggest and the baddest and the best firm. Now, some people want a solo, some people want a personal touch, but there are efficiencies in scale and operation, and well, when you reach that higher level. So that's why, we've been so focused on growth and expansion and market
Mhm.
share because it becomes more and more difficult to be a small firm with the consolidation, with the equity injection and funding that you see in these types of states because there's a lot of money that a lot of these firms have, hundreds of millions of dollars to put into marketing. So if you're not positioned to compete, then, you know, it's going to be very difficult to survive.
Right. It almost becomes you're either the bigger shark eating the minnows or you're the minnow that's just struggling not to get eaten. In that respect, any advice for the minnows out there? Any advice for, put yourself back in time when you were kind of figuring out the landscape, which was very different than it is now. Have you ever thought, what would you do if you were sort of newer or even not even newer, but even just established but smaller, running either solo or even say a handful of lawyers in a shop?
Yeah, what you want to do, and it goes back to poker, right? I keep bringing, because litigation is often about, leverage, and there's a lot of the same analogies, maybe because
Uh-huh.
I used to play, especially a lot of cards, but you don't want to be a short stack. You don't want to be the type of firm, small firm, where a big corporate defendant or an insurance company thinks that they can just paper you and you're going to capitulate, right? So you're
Hmm.
going to want to make sure that you have enough resources internally in terms of manpower, in terms of money, so you have the chips to fight the case. And if you don't, look, there's no shame in teaming up with a law firm that does have those resources. You can co-counsel, you can bring in a shark on a particular case to help you out. There's no shame in it. Add some resources to the team. It will often do wonders for your client. And, there are a lot of firms out there that aren't necessarily marketing to the consumer, but they're marketing to those smaller firms trying to get that
Hmm.
type of business.
Outstanding. Right. So it's even just realize be realistic about where you are in that market space. And when you're talking about pulling in sort of, you know, pulling in some extra help, extra resources, how do you see that, ideal formula, if there is one, taking place in terms of the alignment of, who sort of fits into that team structure that's formulated?
It depends on the type of case. There are firms that have particular specialty, right? Obviously, I'm in California. We were affected by the wildfires, and there's firms
Hmm.
that have decades of experience litigating those types of cases, right? We'll get aviation cases sometimes, or different maritime cases. And even though I've handled some of them, that's not your typical type of personal injury case. So if it's an area of expertise that we don't have, I have no problem co-counseling or even sometimes referring the case to someone that has the experience. I compare it to
Right.
medicine. You can't be good at absolutely everything. So
Sure.
it's something outside your wheelhouse, you know, team up with someone. There's no shame in that, and it'll be more effective representation for your client.
Outstanding. And in terms of, again, just adaption going on, how about technology? Or, there's obviously we're in this boom of AI. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's trying to be in the forefront of it, integrating it. Have you yourself seen, I guess, a difference in terms of just the workflow, the fulfillment piece of it, integrating AI, and or you're obviously a maverick, always pushing the envelope for what's tomorrow, not just today. What are your thoughts on that front?
I think AI is extremely important both from an operations perspective and as far as marketing. And we've hired data scientists here at the firm because whether it's evaluating our employees or evaluating our leads or just even our processes, whatever we can do to make our firm more efficient, we're going to do for a couple reasons. One, we're paid on results, on contingency. So I'm not billing here. We're not paid to be inefficient. You have firms who still have associates doing discovery and charging hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour, where it can potentially, at least be helped by staff or by AI. Just an example to speed things up, or document review. Again, I'm not saying that we're going to be replaced by robots, but to the extent that you could be more efficient, whether you're a billable firm or an efficiency firm, a contingency firm like us, that's going to help your client. So we obviously have a motivation to do so that maybe some other firms don't because of the nature of what we do. And then the other thing is, and it kind of goes back to, the way we market digital and social, our clients tend to be a little bit more sophisticated than
Hmm.
someone's call. Some of them the yellow pages, right? They're going to
Right,
be comfortable
right,
with text, they're going to be comfortable with email, electronic signatures. We're going to be going back and forth. That's a lot easier than someone that has to, come to the office. And again, everyone's always welcome to come to our office. We're
sure,
always available, but we don't want to be dinosaurs here. We want to make things as quick and efficient and as painless as possible for our clients. So if we can embrace technology to do so, we
right,
absolutely will. And because of the type of firm we are, for instance, even when we started 2004, we were entirely paperless. Everything that came in was scanned and shredded. We want to be able to access our client files anywhere as opposed to, hauling around boxes of documents like a lot of lawyers do.
right. No, that's and those methods of connecting with clients, they're not only probably a lot more welcomed and appreciated, they save you a ton of effort and headaches and costs. But I think nowadays, clients not only are okay with it, but they look at that as a cutting edge efficiency solution, and they're saying, yeah, if you can save me a trip across town, I'm not looking at it as a loss for that personal handshake. I'm looking at it as a win that, you just saved me an hour or two out of my day, not having to battle traffic.
Oh, no question. If you can't, be texting your lawyer or your law firm and you got to pick up the phone or show up in person, that's just a firm that really does not know what they're doing when it comes to technology. So, we have an app for our clients, and, at any stage of the case, they can send us documents, they can get a status update
Right.
immediately. Make sure that we have folks manning um, both the app, text messages, real time. You should be able to text your lawyer, your law firm for an update with a question, send or receive documents and information just like anyone else in your life.
Right. What would you say to the lawyers that are sort of a little bit anachronistic, a little bit stubborn, a little maybe stuck in the old ways of what they were used to doing? And, they might even hear us talking right now and roll their eyes and start, well, there's nothing quite like the insert, however it's characterized, the personal touch, tradition, so on and so forth. What would your advice be to sort of, that mentality of folks?
David, I gotta tell you, lawyers are incredibly stubborn, and I said we're like dinosaurs. You look at the court system, right? Still, finally, most courts have electronic filing for everything, but you still have judges that require, in-person appearances for a 5-minute hearing that can be handled via Zoom or telephonically. Think of all the
Right.
time that's so, I get it, especially some of the more experienced lawyers and the judges, they are having a tough time adapting. But it's really an adapt or die if you are
Hmm.
talking about firms that are going to set themselves up for success. I mean, the the client base is going to expect this and want this, despite the old school lawyers stubbornly refusing to embrace it and move in the direction of technology. And I wouldn't be surprised if long term, maybe not this year or next year, but over time, that those practices are no longer um, they're no longer sustainable because
Yeah.
this is the direction everyone is headed in. And you can't be Blockbuster Video or a taxi cab company when you got, Netflix and Uber and Lyft. Um,
That is a sobering warning. I think some gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen out there might need to hear. And it's sobering, but it's very real.
it is, and it's the reality of business and law, just like anything else, is a business. I wish it wasn't, but if you do not take advantage of technology, you will be overtaken by a lawyer or law firm that does.
some people really need to get that message. It's now let me ask you, just from a kind of a little bit of a trademark perspective here, if you were to have a personal or firm sort of coat of arms as a lawyer, as an individual, what messages or symbols would you sort of want to make sure are inserted into that? What would that look like?
I never really thought of that. It's a great question. I've personally shied away from some of the traditional law firm, the scales, Lady Justice. We really want to be um, a little more. If you walk into our firm, you'll see it kind of looks like a tech startup in terms of the layout. It's a very open floor plan. So I haven't really thought about that, but I would definitely something pretty cool because we do, again, we're still a law firm, but we do fancy ourselves like a tech company in terms of how our setup is and how our culture is.
Outstanding. Well, I love the aggressiveness of leaning into the times, leading into the trends, technology, both technological and just the reality, the market forces prevailing in the industry. I think that your story is a very principled one in terms of really, looking forward and finding your niche, your lane. And I think there's a lot that lawyers can, lawyers and businessmen alike can learn from. And I think it's inspiring, and I think it's something that shows what can be done in a pretty short amount of time, with not just the effort, but also the creativity and that open mindset. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing a lot of these. I mean, it'd be a shame if people were blind to it or stubborn to it, because I think there's a lot of principles that individuals should adapt if they want to be able to be competitive in this landscape. So thank you very much for sharing them.
Of course, thank you, Stephen, for having me. It was a pleasure to be on, and hopefully, everyone listening, watching, found some of this to be interesting. And like you, I'm available if anyone has any questions. Reach out to me, email, social media. Like I said, I like to connect with other lawyers, people who are in the industry because it's something that I think is important. We're always learning, we're always growing professionally, and we can learn from one another.
It was a pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, your insight, and your stories. And again, just one more shout out for your book. I want to mention again was From Harvard to Hashtag: My Journey from Big Law to Business. And feel free if you want to mention any sites or handles. Obviously there's links. Depending on the medium, but if there's anything you want to make sure are top of mind for listeners, feel free to mention them.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Stephen. My book, all the proceeds go to foster kids. So it's not a moneymaker, just really
Beautiful.
a, you know, something that I believe in. The stats on kids that grow up in foster care is really sad, at least here in California. More than 50% of them end up within a few years of turning 18 homeless, dead in prison, or traffic. So
Wow.
whatever we can do for them, and shout out to my wife, it's what she believes in. And yeah, my firm is West Coast Trial Lawyers. We're on all social media platforms. I'm Neama Rahmani. You can find me everywhere. You can probably see me on TV every once in a while too. So thanks for having me, Stephen.
Beautiful. Very admirable for giving back that way vis-a-vis the foster parent, foster child dynamic. Um, Nima Ramani, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure speaking with you.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks again.